There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but only one way to truly live, fighting in the Emperor's name. Across the blasted plains of Gothis IV, the horizon was burning red, not with the light of dawn, but with the reflection of a sky aflame, streaked by the entry of 1,000,000 falling stars. Each blazing streak was not a meteor, but a spore, alive, hungry, and filled with the promise of consumption. Within the adamantine walls of Fortress Absolom, the brothers of the Crimson Castellan's chapter watched in silence as their auspex arrays screamed warnings. The machine spirits shrieked in binary agony as the numbers climbed beyond known capacity. 5 million life signs, 5 million Tyranids, a swarm so vast it registered as a living continent on orbital scans. Captain Gaius Verant stood upon the fortress battlements, his Mark X Gravis armor glinting faintly in the crimson light. His helm's optics scanned the distance, amplifying what no mortal eye could endure. The black ocean of chitin and claws stretching to the horizon. Behind him, the fortress hummed with desperate preparation. Servitors carried crates of crack missiles and promethium canisters into position. Tech Marines murmured prayers of activation over turret cogitators and void shield emitters. Chaplains stalked the ramparts, their Crozius arcalum raised high as they intoned litanies of hatred and endurance. "Brothers," boomed Varant through the voxcasters, his voice echoing across the steel walls. "The great devourer comes not as a foe to be defeated, but as a test to be endured. We are the Emperor's bulwark. We do not yield. We do not break." A chorus of vox clicks answered him, acknowledgement, affirmation, and faith forged in ceramite. Down below, Imperial Guard auxilia scurried like ants around the outer trenches, laying mines and setting up autocannon emplantments. They were men and women of the 17th Dorsian Regiment, veterans who had seen too many worlds die to the hive fleets. Their commander, Colonel Marek, wiped the grime from his faceplate and looked up at the massive fortress that loomed above them. The Space Marines were gods to him, and yet even gods could bleed. "Ever seen 5 million bugs before?" muttered his adjutant. "No," I replied, loading his bolt pistol. "But I've seen men hold longer odds. Keep the line tight. Pray hard." In orbit, the void battle had already been lost. The defense fleet was gone, consumed, shredded by bioplasma storms and living torpedoes spat by the Tyranid bioships. Only the burning remains of their wreckage streaked across the atmosphere now, falling like tears of iron. Inside the fortress's command sanctum, Librarian Severin stood before a flickering hololith, his psychic hood aglow with pale blue energy. He could feel them, the minds of the swarm. Not individuals, but a single, immense consciousness pressing against his own like a storm tide against a wall. He clutched his staff tighter as whispers filled his thoughts. Hunger. Endless, gnawing hunger. "Captain," Severin said over the command vox, "the shadow in the warp thickens. Vox communications will soon fail. We must rely on signal flares and line-of-sight commands once it reaches full density." "Then light the skies, brother. The Emperor will see our defiance from Holy Terra itself." The fortress was a masterpiece of imperial defense architecture. Triple-layered walls of adamantine-reinforced ferro-concrete, void shield arrays, and layered kill zones designed to slaughter anything that approached. But against the Tyranids, even perfection had limits. From the observation tower, the first spores began to fall. They screamed through the atmosphere like dying angels, bursting open in wet, meaty impacts. The ground outside the walls boiled as mycetic pods disgorged their contents. Endless gaunts, hormogaunts, and termogaunts, each chittering in alien fury. Then the second wave fell. Larger shapes, heavy with wings. Harpy broods and gargoyles descended like a storm of blades, their wings cutting through the smog as they screamed over the fortress walls. Bolter turrets tracked them, filling the sky with streaks of mass reactive fire. Competence met chaos. Every marine moved with drilled precision. Target locks, burst fire, reload, fire again. Servo arms swung heavy weapons into place. The thunderfire cannons boomed like gods of thunder, each shell vaporizing dozens of Xenos in gory eruptions. And yet, still they came. The swarm was endless, like a living tide of darkness. For hours the guns thundered, the walls shook, the sky turned black with wings and blood mist, but the crimson castellans did not falter. In the command vox, static hissed, a final warning before the shadow in the warp crushed all communication. Librarian Severin turned his psychic gaze skyward. The hive mind was coming closer, and in its arrival, reality itself began to groan. The hive descends, and it will not stop until we are nothing. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul. The first wave came like a living avalanche. From the trenches before Fortress Absolom, the 17th Dorsian Regiment opened fire in a wall of las blasts and tracer rounds. The air shimmered red with energy discharge, the heat so intense that nearby snow and ash turned to vapor. The Tyranids hit the minefield seconds later. Detonations tore through the chitinous ranks, launching chunks of organic shrapnel into the sky. But for every creature that died, 10 more climbed over its corpse. Captain Verent watched from the battlements, his helm's optics painting range markers across the writhing landscape. "Fire at will," he voxed to the fortress batteries. The command sanctum erupted with motion. Servitors and human crew interfaced with the macro cannons and heavy bolter nests. Moments later, the fortress's main gun spoke, a bass roar that split the heavens. Each shell exploded with apocalyptic fury, reducing hundreds of gaunts to pulp and dust. But even as the killing fields grew thick with alien corpses, the Auspex readings only climbed. The swarm wasn't slowing, it was accelerating. Down in the trenches, Colonel Marek shouted over the din. "Hold the line! Reinforce Sector 4! They're massing near the western ridge!" A Vox trooper beside him screamed as a spine fist round punctured his chest plate. Marek ripped the weapon from the dying man's hands and fired point-blank into the advancing shadows. The las fire carved through gaunts, the smell of burned chitin thick in the air. "By the throne, they're crawling under the ground now," someone shouted. They were right. The soil beneath the trenches bulged and burst open as raveners tore upward in a spray of gore and dirt, ripping soldiers apart in seconds. Panic threatened the line until a thunderous roar answered from above. A squad of aggressors dropped from the fortress walls via grav anchors, their heavy flamestorm gauntlets igniting in a roar of blessed promethium. In seconds, the trench line became an inferno. The Ravener screeched, melting alive beneath liquid fire. The aggressors advanced in perfect formation, their armor blackened but unyielding. "Cleanse and burn," Sergeant Horrocks voxed, his voice calm amid chaos. "For the Emperor." The sight reignited morale. The guardsmen rallied behind the giants, firing over their shoulders as they pushed the Tyranids back, if only a few meters. Competence met terror head-on. Every Marine knew his role. Every guard fought as though salvation depended on the next trigger pull. But the swarm adapted. It always did. Above the smoke, dark shapes emerged, harpies diving through turret fire, spitting bioacid that corroded armor plating. The fortress's automated defenses tracked and killed dozens, but one managed to crash into a turret tower. The explosion sent a shockwave through the upper rampart, hurling servitors and Marines alike into the void below. "Tower Alpha breached," came the report. "Secondary munitions detonated, void shields fluctuating." Inside the command sanctum, Tech Marine Darvian knelt before the humming shield generators, his mechanodendrite sparking as he chanted machine prayers. "By the omniscious will, stabilize. The Emperor's work endures through flesh and steel alike." He plunged a power tool into the glowing conduit, his armor crackling with residual energy as the void shields flickered back online. "Shields holding," he voxed, voice strained, "but strain limits are at 94%. They cannot sustain at this rate for long." Captain Verent didn't hesitate. "Then we hold until the machine spirits die in glory." From the psychic tower above the command bastion, Librarian Severin raised his hand to the skies. His eyes glowed as he invoked the Aegis of Flame, a psychic barrier that shimmered like burning glass. When a new wave of spore mines fell from the clouds, they detonated harmlessly against his warded field, showering the fortress in green fire that turned to harmless light. But the effort was immense. His nose bled freely, and his armor's joints trembled under psychic strain. "They're learning," he rasped. "They're already learning how to break me." Outside, the ground became a churning sea of death. Bolter fire, lasgun volleys, and the endless shrieks of Tyranids blended into one continuous sound, a screaming orchestra of war. Hours passed. The battlefield was unrecognizable. The first defensive ring was nearly buried in alien corpses, but the second trench line held. For every Marine that fell, 20 Tyranids died with him. For every guardsman devoured, 100 burned beneath the flames. And then a momentary silence. The swarm receded. The survivors dared to hope, briefly, that the worst had passed. Captain Verent turned to his Vox officer. "Status report. Minimal ammunition loss, 42% casualties in outer line, reinforcements stable, Emperor be praised." The Auspex screamed again. New readings, massive, much larger life forms moving within the swarm, and behind them psychic shadows deeper than before. Librarian Severin staggered, clutching his temples. "They send the beasts now, the synapse creatures. The real attack begins." Verent looked to the horizon. Dust clouds rose, heavy and pulsing with the rhythm of countless clawed feet. The first wave hadn't been the assault. It had been the warm-up. All units, Varent voxed, prepare for the next strike. This time the hive comes to feed. The walls began to tremble. The first wave had broken and survived. The second would decide who endured. Are you still with us, warriors of the Imperium? Subscribe to witness the next chapter of this war before the void claims us all. The ground shook as though the world itself rebelled against existence. The second wave had begun. From the red haze of the plains, colossal silhouettes emerged, towering carnifexes, trigons, and lumbering tyrannofexes, each bristling with biocannons and spore chimneys. Behind them slithered massive synapse creatures, their psychic presence pressing on every human mind like a vice. Even through layers of ceramite, space marines felt their stomachs knot and their instincts scream, "Flee!" Captain Varent stood atop the central bastion, his power sword sheathed at his side, optics glowing. "Bring the fortress guns online. All batteries full charge. I want the plains cleansed." The macro cannons and laser cannon emplacements turned toward the advancing Titans. Machine spirits howled through the Voxnet as tech marines synchronized firing sequences. Target lock, holy calibration, fire. The sky ignited. Bolts of sunfire lashed across the battlefield. Carnifexes disintegrated under direct hits, their carapaces vaporized in bursts of plasma and molten ichor. Yet for every monstrosity that fell, two more climbed over its steaming remains. The hive mind had decided. Fortress Absolom would fall, or the world would burn with it. Inside the control sanctum, Librarian Severin struggled against the psychic tide. His mind reached across the warp, fending off the synaptic pulses that sought to crush their sanity. He saw flashes, alien thoughts, the pulse of shared hunger, the pooled intelligence of the hive mind watching him. He realized with horror that it was studying them. Learning every defense, every rhythm, every shot. "They are mimicking us," he gasped over the command channel. "They anticipate our volleys. We must change our patterns now." "Then we'll teach them the meaning of imperial innovation," growled Varent. In the lower fortress decks, squads of intercessors and devastators reformed. Ammo servitors clanked through smoke and flame, distributing crack missiles and melta charges. Chaplain Varn strode through the chaos, his armor black as a void storm. "Brothers, remember this day. For every claw that tears our flesh, we tear back tenfold. The Emperor's eyes are upon us. Do not fail his gaze." The Marines roared their oath and surged forward to the parapets. Below, Hormagaunts leapt into the outer trenches, impaling themselves on bayonets and lasgun fire. Screams filled the air, some human, some alien. The walls trembled as trigons burst from beneath the ground, tumbling into the sublevels of the fortress. Massive talons ripped through ferrocrete, sending defenders tumbling into the lower decks. "Breach in subsection 9A," came the alarm. "Xenos infestation spreading." Varent switched to internal Vox. "Strike Squad Aurelius, intercept at breach point. Use melta charges, no quarter." Moments later, explosions shook the underhalls as Aurelius' squad advanced. The Marines fought through confined corridors, laser bolts flickering in the dark like lightning. A Trigon erupted before them, its head shattering through a support pillar. Sergeant Aurelius threw a melta-bomb, its explosion reducing the creature's skull to boiling mist. "Breach contained," Aurelius voxed, "but we are sealing this section. Too many tunnels opening." Above, the fortress continued to thunder. The macro cannons overheated. One gun exploded outright, hurling molten shrapnel that tore through friend and foe alike. Still, the defense held, barely. Librarian Severin staggered to his knees as a deeper psychic pulse struck him. In his mind, he saw a vast shadow unfurling beyond the storm clouds, a creature of impossible scale moving through the swarm's art, a hive tyrant, leading from the shadows, its synaptic will driving the millions below. "Captain," Severin gasped, "the mind behind the swarm has revealed itself." "Then we cut off the head, and the body may falter," Varant said grimly. He turned to the Vox network. "All artillery, target central command node of the swarm. Coordinates, mark Sigma 9. Hundreds of cannons aligned as one. The volley that followed tore open the landscape, vaporizing entire broods. For a moment, the psychic pressure lessened, then returned twice as strong. The hive tyrant had survived. It roared, its psychic scream echoing across the plains and shaking every mortal soul. In that instant, the void shields flickered again and failed. A wall section collapsed under the strain. Tyranid warriors and carnifexes surged into the breach, trampling the dying and the dead alike. "Second line, engage!" Varant commanded. The fortress corridors became hell. Bolter rounds detonated at point-blank range, blood and acid spraying the walls. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the stench of burning alien flesh. Sergeant Horrix's aggressors waded through the carnage, their flamestorm sweeping entire chambers clean. But the price was mounting. Marines fell, guardsmen screamed, even the machine spirits wailed through damaged circuits. At the command dais, Varant gripped his sword and drew it from its sheath. Its edge shimmered with the faint blue halo of a power field. "So it begins," he murmured. "The fortress breaks, but the chapter does not." As the Tyranid swarm poured through the shattered outer wall, the crimson banners of the Castellans still flew from the highest spires, torn and blood-stained but unfallen. Above the chaos, a single orbital auspex still flickered, transmitting what it saw back into the void. 5 million life signs converging on one fortress. The walls trembled, the hive pressed in, and the defenders prepared to make their last stand. Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes? The fortress was dying. Smoke filled the corridors of Fortress Absolom like blood in water. Each breath was filtered through ash, every sound muffled by the constant thunder of bolter fire. What had once been an impenetrable bastion of imperial might was now a charnel house of steel and fire. Captain Varant moved through the command deck, his armor scorched and pitted with acid burns. His helm's optics flickered with static as data feeds failed one by one. "Status," he demanded over the Vox. "Outer defenses gone," replied Techmarine Darvian, his voice ragged but firm. "Void shields destroyed. Primary reactor compromised, running at 51% capacity. Structural integrity failing." Varant turned to Librarian Severin, who knelt near the central hololith, the psychic glow of his eyes dimming. "The hive tyrant draws closer," Severin said weakly. "I feel its shadow inside the walls. It hunts us now, not for victory, but for annihilation." "Then let it come," growled Chaplain Varn, tightening his grip on his Crozius. "We will make this fortress its tomb." Through shattered viewport glass, the defender saw the plains outside, carpets of writhing flesh and ichor. The swarm had consumed everything. Only the inner walls of Fortress Absolom remained, glowing red-hot from the endless assault. The order came down through the Vox like a final prayer. "All surviving units, fall back to the sanctum of the Emperor. This is our final bastion." The fortress trembled as retreating squads sealed blast doors behind them. What remained of the 17th Dorsian Regiment limped toward the inner sanctum, no longer soldiers, but ghosts wrapped in torn fatigues and blood. Sergeant Horrocks' aggressors took up rear guard, firing controlled bursts into the corridors as Tyranid warriors flooded after them. Each explosion illuminated their faces through blackened visors. "Brothers," Horrocks voxed through static, "leave no ammunition behind. The Emperor demands empty guns before he demands our lives." The sanctum of the Emperor was the heart of the fortress, a cathedral of ceramite and iron, lined with burning candles and the towering statue of the Emperor's likeness, sword raised to the heavens. This was where the Castellans made their stand. The Marines took position behind barricades of debris and wrecked armor. Meltgun squads prepared overlapping kill zones. The guardsmen set up heavy stubbers between the statues, reciting prayers under their breath. Even the wounded clutched lasguns, their hands trembling but unwilling to let go. Chaplains walked the aisles, blessing every weapon and warrior. Their voices rose above the distant screams of the dying. "Brothers and sisters, know this. Our deaths are not an end, but an offering. The hive may consume our flesh, but our souls belong to the Emperor." When the great gates finally gave way, the Tyranids poured through in a flood of claws and fangs. The last stand began. Bolters roared, flamers unleashed torrents of promethium that turned the sanctum into a blazing hell. The first dozen waves fell like wheat before the scythe. Piles of alien corpses rose high enough to block the doorways. Then the larger beasts came. A tyrant guard, towering and plated in obsidian carapace, smashed through a column, roaring in a frequency that made the walls vibrate. Varant was there to meet it. His power sword sang as it cleaved through one of the creature's claws. Acid blood splashed across his chestplate, eating through his armor. He didn't falter. With a second strike, he drove the blade deep into the tyrant guard's skull, splitting it in half. "For the Emperor!" Varant shouted, even as flames danced across his armor. Librarian Severin stood beside the statue of the Emperor, his psychic aura blazing bright enough to cast shadows across the sanctum. He reached deep into the warp, drawing on power that no mortal should wield. With a shout of fury, he unleashed a psychic storm that ripped through the Tyranid ranks, flaying hundreds of creatures in a single blinding burst. But it cost him dearly. Blood streamed from his eyes and nose as his armor's joints cracked. "Captain, it's coming, the hive tyrant, here." The walls buckled, the air turned cold, the hive tyrant stepped through the smoke, a towering abomination of muscle, armor, and alien majesty. 4 scything talons dripped with venom. Its psychic aura crushed the minds of mortals. Guardsmen screamed and clawed at their helmets, dying before it even struck. Chaplain Varn charged first, Crozius raised high. His weapon struck the tyrant's carapace, shattering part of its exoskeleton. But in an instant, one claw impaled him through the chest. He laughed even as blood filled his mouth. "The Emperor sees me," he whispered, and detonated his frag grenades, taking a chunk of the beast's chest with him. Varant roared and lunged. The tyrant swung, claws clashing against Varant's power sword, sparks of alien ichor and blue lightning filling the air. Around them, the last defenders fought on, even as the sanctum turned to ruin. Above them, the statue of the Emperor cracked from the heat and shock waves. The face of the stone god crumbled, its sword shattered, but its shadow still fell over the battle like a benediction. When the tyrant's final blow came, Varant met it with his last strength, driving his sword up through its throat. Both fell, locked in death. The psychic scream that followed tore through the hive's coordination. The swarm faltered. For a moment, just one, the fortress stood silent. Still breathing, Captain Varant pressed a bloodied hand against the Emperor's broken statue. "We held," he whispered. Above, the sky burned with the dawn. The swarm began to recede. The fortress had endured, but at what cost? The tension builds, subscribe to witness the fate of the survivors. When the sun rose over Gaethus Forth, it revealed a graveyard masquerading as a fortress. The once mighty walls of Fortress Absolom now stood in ruins, cratered, scorched, and half-buried beneath mountains of Tyranid corpses. Smoke curled upward in ghostly spirals, mingling with the ash of 1,000 burned Xenos. The scent of death hung so thick it turned the air metallic. From that silent carnage, a lone figure moved through the haze. Captain Gaius Varant, battered and broken, but alive. His armor was split in 6 places, the crimson heraldry of the Castellans almost black with gore. His sword was gone, his helmet cracked, but his eyes still burned with the same iron light of duty. He staggered past the fallen statue of the Emperor, its head split in 2, the sword shattered, but even broken, the stone figure seemed to watch over him. All around him lay the aftermath of apocalypse. The sanctum of the Emperor, where the final stand had taken place, was reduced to rubble. The marble floors were slick with alien ichor and human blood. Dozens of lifeless forms, space marines and guardsmen alike, lay where they had fallen, still clutching their weapons. Librarian Severin's body was found near the altar, his psychic hood shattered, his hands fused to the floor from the energy he'd unleashed. His last act had been to seal the fortress in a psychic barrier as the hive tyrant died, a final, impossible gesture that saved what little remained. Tech Marine Darvion, burned and crippled, still worked even in death. His mechadendrites were fused into the reactor's conduit, his body used as a bridge to stabilize the machine's spirit. His sacrifice kept the fortress from detonating when its heart began to fail. Captain Varant paused beside each of them, whispering the oaths of remembrance. Your duty is done, brothers. The Emperor knows your names." Outside the walls, the swarm was gone. The hive tyrant's death had shattered its control. Without its will, the lesser creatures had scattered like insects in sunlight. Some fled into the wastes, others lay twitching, dying from synaptic collapse. The victory had been total and meaningless. A flickering Vox unit crackled beside Varant's boot. He stooped, lifting it with a trembling hand. Static hissed, then a faint, broken voice emerged. "This is Colonel Marek. Survivors regrouping in sub-level 7. Maybe 30 of us left. Emperor, help us all." Varant's voice rasped through damaged Vox emitters. "Hold fast, Colonel. The Castellans endure." There was no answer. The channel died. He walked to the outer wall, gazing upon the horizon where 5 million Tyranids had once stood. Now only silence, only dust. But as he looked out, a grim thought crept into his mind. He had seen the hive fleets before. He knew their patterns, their strategies. What had struck Gaithus forth was not the full fury of a fleet. It had been a tendril, a fraction, a probe of the greater swarm beyond the void. His heart sank beneath the weight of realization. "This was only the beginning," he murmured, "only one tendril of Leviathan's hunger." A cold wind swept across the plains, stirring the ashes into ghostly shapes. Somewhere in the distance, a lone Auspex beacon blinked, transmitting its signal into the empty void. The Imperium would hear of this battle. They would call it a victory. They would say the Castellans had held the line. But Captain Varant knew the truth. They had won nothing, only delayed the inevitable. He sank to one knee before the shattered statue of the Emperor. The fortress walls groaned in the rising wind. "We held the line," he whispered. "We bought them one more day. May that day be enough." The Emperor's gaze, cold and eternal, stared down through cracked stone and flame. Far above, in the void beyond sight, new shadows drifted toward the stars of the eastern fringe, vast living vessels that blotted out the light. The great devourer stirred once more. And on the dying world of Gaithus forth, beneath the ruins of its fortress, the last surviving Castellan lifted his gaze skyward and whispered the only prayer left to him. The fortress still stood, but only as a monument to sacrifice. Of the 1,000 warriors who had manned its walls, fewer than 100 survived. The rest became part of the planet itself. Ashes mingled with alien ichor, and names whispered in the silence of eternity. The Imperium would record the siege of Fortress Absolom as a victory of faith and endurance, but those who knew the truth would understand it differently. The victory came not through triumph, but through defiance, through men who refused to die quietly, through brothers who stood shoulder to shoulder against the impossible and said, "No further." Yet, even in the glow of that Pyrrhic victory, a shadow lingered. For every hive tendril slain, another stirred in the dark. The great devourer was eternal, endless, patient. And somewhere, in the echoing halls of another world's fortress, alarms began to scream again. The Emperor's light burns eternal, but at what cost?